the quiet town of Terre Haute, Indiana, where life moves at a modest pace and the hum of small-town tradition echoes in every corner, a young boy named Richard Goodall was quietly discovering the one thing that made him feel alive: music. Long before the internet would come to know his name, Richard was just another child growing up in a loving, working-class family. His most prized possession wasn't a bicycle or a baseball glove. It was a humble Radio Shack stereo that sat on a shelf in his bedroom. That stereo became his window to the world, an escape that allowed him to drift beyond the borders of his hometown and imagine himself on stages far larger than any found in Terre Haute. Every evening, after finishing his chores and homework, Richard would retreat into his room, press play on his favorite cassette tapes, and sing his heart out. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing a feeling, the euphoria of becoming one with a song. His family often heard his voice drifting through the walls, a sound so pure and passionate it made them pause. But as Richard grew older, those carefree musical nights became fewer and farther between. Responsibilities crept in like a slow fog. By the time he graduated high school, dreams of music had to take a back seat. College wasn't an option, money was tight, and Richard knew he needed stability. So he took a job just 3 blocks away from the house he grew up in at Choney Rose Middle School, not as a teacher or administrator, but as a janitor. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. Day in and day out, Richard swept floors, cleaned bathrooms, and made sure classrooms were spotless before the bell rang. Still, that boy who sang to his stereo never really disappeared. He just got quieter. And yet, in those early years of working at the school, no one could have guessed that this quiet janitor with a secret passion for music was destined to one day bring an entire nation to its feet. The seed had been planted long ago, quietly, humbly, and though buried under years of routine, it was still waiting to bloom. For Richard Goodall, the ordinary was simply a prelude to the extraordinary. As the years rolled on at Choney Rose Middle School, Richard Goodall became more than just a man who cleaned the halls. He became a fixture of the building, a quiet presence who showed up every day with a smile, a mop, and occasionally a melody. Though his official title remained janitor, among students and staff, he was affectionately known as Mr. Richard, and his true gift was something no job description could capture. It started small, just him humming under his breath while emptying trash bins or softly singing as he polished the tile floors. But over time, people started to notice. Teachers paused their planning periods to listen outside their doors. Students who usually hurried through the hallways would slow down just to hear the janitor's voice drift through the corridors. There was something undeniably warm and real about it, untrained, yes, but rich with emotion. What truly set Richard apart was how effortlessly his music connected with people. He never asked for attention. In fact, he seemed embarrassed when others clapped for him, brushing off compliments with a modest smile. But word spread. Soon, he was asked to sing during school assemblies, and by the time Veterans Day rolled around, he was the highlight of the event. Year after year, he performed God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood, each time bringing tears to the eyes of faculty and students alike. People would record his performances on their phones, whispering to one another, he should be famous. But to Richard, it was never about recognition. He just wanted to make people feel something. Behind that mop and broom was a man whose heart beat to the rhythm of every lyric he sang, whose decades of quiet service to a school had somehow prepared him for a role he hadn't even realized he was auditioning for. This wasn't a hobby, it was who he was. And though he'd long given up the idea of ever performing on a real stage, those little moments in a school gymnasium or hallways were enough to remind him that music hadn't left him. It was still very much alive. The students saw it, the teachers saw it, and eventually the whole world would see it too. Because one day, in the most unexpected way, the janitor with a golden voice would be discovered, not by a talent scout or a music label, but by a smartphone, a TikTok account, and the pure power of raw, undeniable talent. It was just another school event in 2022, the kind of assembly Richard Goodall had sung at countless times before. The gymnasium was filled with the usual hum of middle schoolers settling into the bleachers, the faculty checking microphones, and the quiet anticipation that always preceded his performances. But this time, a teacher suggested he sing something different, something that would really showcase what he could do. After a brief pause, Richard chose Don't Stop Believin' by Journey, a song that had always resonated with him on a personal level. As the opening chords began to play through the school's modest PA system, he took a breath and let the lyrics pour out, not just with pitch-perfect delivery, but with the kind of emotional gravity that only someone who had lived every word could convey. Unbeknownst to him, a teaching assistant had pulled out her phone and hit record. What she captured was more than a performance, it was a moment. In just a few minutes, Richard's voice soared through the gym and through her camera lens, immortalizing something that had taken 23 years to build. Later that day, she posted the video to TikTok, thinking it might get a few local likes. Instead, it exploded. Overnight, Richard's voice reached more people than he ever imagined possible. Within hours, the video had tens of thousands of views. By the weekend, it had surpassed 1 million. The comment section flooded with praise. Who is this man? I've got chills. This is the voice of the year. Viewers from across the globe were captivated not just by the sound, but by the story behind it. Even members of Journey took notice. Most notably, Steve Perry, the original frontman, shared the clip, stunned by the raw talent and genuine passion Richard delivered. Suddenly, a janitor from Terre Haute wasn't just a local legend. He was a national sensation. The halls of Choney Rose buzzed with energy. Teachers printed out the news articles. Students bragged about knowing him. And Richard? He remained as humble as ever, still pushing his cleaning cart, still singing while he worked, though now with a new light in his eyes. Because something had shifted. The world had finally seen what his small community had known all along, that Richard Goodall wasn't just a man with a voice, he was a man with a destiny, and it was finally catching up with him. Just when the excitement surrounding Richard Goodall's viral moment began to settle, an unexpected email landed in his inbox, one that would catapult his story into an entirely new chapter. The producers of America's Got Talent had seen the now legendary TikTok video and were captivated not only by Richard's powerful voice, but by the humble story that came with it. They reached out personally, inviting him to audition for the upcoming season. At first, Richard thought it was a joke. After all, he had spent over 2 decades cleaning floors, not preparing for television auditions. But as the reality of the invitation set in, so did a mixture of nervous excitement and disbelief. Could a middle-aged janitor from a quiet Indiana town really hold his own on one of the world's biggest stages? With encouragement from his school community and the millions now rooting for him online, Richard accepted. 2 years after that fateful school assembly, he stepped onto the AGT stage on May 27th. The cameras rolled, the lights blazed, and standing before him was the show's iconic panel, Simon Cowell, Heidi Klum, Sofia Vergara, and Howie Mandel. As he stood there in his modest outfit, clutching the microphone with both hands, there was no glitter, no pretense, just a man and his voice. When the first notes of Don't Stop Believin' echoed through the theater, the audience fell silent. And then the room erupted. Richard's performance wasn't just vocally flawless, it was emotionally devastating in the best way. Every lyric felt earned. Every note carried the weight of decades spent dreaming from the sidelines. As he finished the final chorus, the crowd rose to their feet in thunderous applause. But the defining moment came when Heidi Klum, visibly moved, stood and slammed the golden buzzer. The confetti rained down, golden and shimmering, catching in Richard's hair and on his shoulders as he looked around, overwhelmed. Tears welled in his eyes, not because he had finally been recognized, but because this was something he never thought would happen. For a man who had spent years unnoticed in the background, this was a moment of full, blinding spotlight. The standing ovation, the cheers, the confetti, it was validation, recognition, and a long overdue embrace from a world that had finally paused to listen. And just like that, Richard Goodall, the janitor with the golden voice, became a contender in one of television's most competitive stages, with millions watching his every move. With Richard Goodall now thrust into the national spotlight following his breathtaking golden buzzer performance on America's Got Talent, his hometown of Terre Haute, Indiana, responded not with surprise, but with overwhelming pride and unity. To them, Richard was not a newly discovered talent. He was a beloved member of the community, someone who had quietly given so much without ever asking for recognition. In the weeks leading up to the live shows, the energy in Terre Haute was electric. Local businesses began hanging signs that read, "We believe in Richard." Schools organized watch parties, and entire neighborhoods made plans to tune in and vote when the time came. Teachers who had worked alongside him for years shared heartwarming stories with reporters, recounting how Richard would cheer up students with a song or stay late just to help set up for school events. Students past and present flooded social media with clips, photos, and memories, often captioned with "That's my janitor," or "Mr. Richard is a star." The school even hosted a pep rally in his honor, treating him like the homegrown hero he had become. Meanwhile, Richard remained remarkably grounded. Despite media attention and rising fame, he continued working at Choney Rose Middle School, refusing to let his newfound celebrity interfere with the job he still held dear. In fact, he insisted on finishing out the school year, saying he wanted to remain a positive presence for the kids who had supported him from the beginning. Behind the scenes at AGT, Richard was working hard with his newly assigned music team to select songs that would not only challenge his vocal range, but also reflect the emotional authenticity that made him so special. The show's production staff rallied around him, offering everything from vocal coaching to technical help managing his growing social media presence. They understood that Richard wasn't just another contestant. He was a symbol of something bigger, a reminder of the magic that can come from the most unexpected places. As the day of the live show approached, August 13th, anticipation reached a fever pitch. Families gathered around televisions, restaurants hosted viewing parties, and hashtags like #RichardGoodall and #JanitorToSuperstar trended across platforms. But beyond all the buzz and digital fanfare, what stood out most was the genuine love pouring out of Terre Haute. Their janitor had become a beacon of hope, and they were ready to support him with every vote, every cheer, and every proud tear shed in living rooms across town. When August 13th finally arrived, the live stage of America's Got Talent transformed into something more than just a televised competition. It became the battleground where Richard Goodall's decades-long dream would face its most public test. The pressure was enormous. Millions of viewers from across the globe tuned in, and thousands in the live audience waited in hushed anticipation. But for Richard, standing backstage under the bright lights and shimmering set pieces, the moment was personal, emotional, and utterly surreal. With his heart pounding and palms slightly trembling, he walked out onto the stage, greeted by roaring applause and four expectant judges' faces. Then, the music started and everything else faded. Richard's voice, soulful and precise, poured over the crowd like a warm wave. Every lyric he sang was infused with the weight of his life story. The long nights cleaning floors, the decades of unnoticed talent, the moments of doubt tempered by stubborn hope. His voice wasn't just heard, it was felt. It resonated not only for its technical beauty, but for the lived-in truth behind it. The judges nodded in approval, the audience swayed and clapped, and once again, Richard left the stage to a standing ovation. But beyond the performance itself, the behind-the-scenes experience during the live shows revealed an even more layered journey. The AGT production crew had fully embraced Richard, helping him navigate everything from wardrobe fittings to the nuances of post-performance interviews. His music team worked tirelessly to find arrangements that would challenge him but still honor the sincerity of his voice. Richard, always humble, approached each rehearsal with gratitude and an eagerness to learn, earning the respect of everyone around him. Meanwhile, his online presence was exploding. Clips of his golden buzzer moment were replayed and reshared across platforms, while fans began creating tribute videos and heartfelt reaction content. Offers began rolling in from record producers, venue managers, and even other artists who wanted to collaborate with him. Yet, amid all this newfound attention and opportunity, Richard remained refreshingly unchanged. He continued staying in touch with his school, checking in on students, and even mailing handwritten thank you notes to those who had supported him early on. For him, each step forward was not just a chance to chase fame, but a way to honor the journey that got him there. His performance on August 13th wasn't just a song, it was a statement. It told the world that sometimes greatness waits quietly in the corners of everyday life, and all it takes is one moment for it to shine through. In the aftermath of his unforgettable performance on the AGT live stage, Richard Goodall's life transformed in ways that even he hadn't dared to imagine. With golden confetti barely settled in the memory of viewers, industry doors that had once seemed permanently shut suddenly swung wide open. Music executives reached out with offers to record albums, booking agents inquired about nationwide tours, and social media influencers begged for interviews and collaborations. Even high-profile artists and celebrities posted about him, drawn to the authenticity of his story and the pure emotion of his voice. For many, this level of attention would be intoxicating, overwhelming even, but not for Richard. The same humility that had defined his life before fame now became the grounding force in the face of it. Despite a whirlwind of opportunities, he never forgot where he came from or the values that shaped him. He returned home between tapings, greeted by cheering neighbors and welcome home signs lining the fences of Terre Haute. Yet instead of basking in the praise, he visited Choney Rose Middle School and asked if there was still cleaning work to be done. He didn't want the students to see him differently. In interviews, he emphasized that while he was deeply grateful for the chances being offered, what mattered most to him was staying true to himself and using his platform for good. When asked if he would leave janitorial work behind for good, he answered with careful thought. Yes, he wanted to make music, but he also hoped to remain connected to the school and the kids who had lifted him up before the world knew his name. Offers to perform at prestigious venues were met with requests to also sing at school assemblies or community events. To Richard, the spotlight wasn't something to chase, but something to use, to bring attention to causes he cared about and to inspire people who, like him, had once been told their dreams were unrealistic. He started mentoring young singers locally, offering encouragement, vocal tips, and a listening ear to anyone who needed it. And while agents planned concert tours and brand teams drafted marketing pitches, Richard focused on sending thank you videos to fans who wrote him heartfelt messages. Fame, he often said, is only meaningful if it brings people together. Through it all, Richard Goodall remained unchanged at his core, a man who loved to sing, who worked hard, and who believed deeply that everyone deserves their moment to shine, no matter how long it takes to get there. As the final credits rolled on his America's Got Talent journey and the cameras turned away to spotlight new stories, Richard Goodall's presence lingered, not as just another viral contestant, but as a lasting symbol of what quiet perseverance and raw authenticity can achieve. His story was never meant to be a flash in the pan or a headline that fades after a week. It was, and continues to be, a message to anyone who has ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or stuck in a life that seemed too ordinary to ever become extraordinary. In interviews following his rise to fame, Richard spoke not of the stages he'd conquered or the celebrities he'd met, but of the importance of staying connected to the people around him. He urged audiences to put their phones down, have real conversations, and never let go of what brings them joy. For Richard, singing had always been that joy, not for applause, but for connection. And now that he had the world's attention, he wanted to use it to remind people that dreams are never out of reach if you're willing to hold on, even when the road ahead feels invisible. He shared stories about students who had written him letters saying they felt inspired to pursue their passions, about strangers who stopped him in airports just to say thank you for reminding them what hope sounds like. And while many fans speculated about record deals, tours, or potential film opportunities, Richard stayed grounded in what mattered most to him, building a life where music and community could coexist. He began speaking at schools and local events, not as a celebrity, but as someone who knew what it was like to feel unseen. His message was always the same. Your dreams do not have an expiration date, and sometimes the most powerful moments come when you least expect them. His performances may have started in a school gym and ended under the dazzling lights of AGT, but the emotional resonance of his journey stretched far beyond any stage. Richard Goodall, the janitor who once sang alone in empty hallways, had become a national voice, not just for talent, but for hope, humility, and the quiet strength it takes to keep believing. And as he looked ahead, with a heart still full of song and a world finally listening, he made it clear that this wasn't the end of his story. If anything, it was just the beginning. The best, as he'd say with a gentle smile, was still yet to come.